missions topic, and this evening what we're looking at is the blessing and the challenges of financial partnerships. So last couple times we've been talking about church planting, and what we want to do this evening is I would like us to talk about some of the considerations that we have when we talk about financially partnering with missionaries. And part of this also gets into the topic of what do you do when you have national pastors, when a missionary is trying to get a church started, how do they fund that? I'm gonna talk about some of the considerations with that. Not to tell you like this is hard and fast, you gotta do it this way, but I think that there are some things that, from my own experience, it's helpful to think them through. So, first of all, I want to start out with a passage of scripture that is sort of a key text, and that is Romans chapter 15. I love going to the book of Romans when we're talking about missions. It's a place that I often go. And here's what it says. Verse 26. It hath pleased them in Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor saints which are at Jerusalem. It hath pleased them verily, and their debtors they are. For if the Gentiles had been made partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister unto them in carnal things. That word carnal it's their physical things, okay? Therefore, after I have performed this and have sealed to them this fruit, I will come by you unto Spain. Now, Spain was a far-off region in Rome from where Paul was working. Paul is in this region. He's preaching the gospel. He's establishing churches. And he's gotten to the place where he doesn't really need to continue working in that area. He wants to take the gospel to another area. And he wants to go to Spain. But in order to do that, he's going to make sure that he gets support. And he's going to Rome because he wants them to support him. So, he says, I'm sure that when I come unto you, I will come in the fullness of the blessing of the gospel of Christ. I beseech you, for the Lord Jesus Christ's sake, for the love of the Spirit, that you strive together with me in your prayers to God for me, that I may be delivered from them that do not believe in Judea, and that my service which I have from Jerusalem may be accepted of the saints, and that I might come unto you with joy by the will of God, and may with you be refreshed. Now this passage of Scripture has a lot to say about the partnership between a missionary, the Apostle Paul, and a church, the church at Rome. And the word that we want to remember is the word stewardship. Matthew 25, 14 through 21 is a parable that Jesus gave. He says that the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling into a far country. He called his servants and delivered unto them his goods. Unto some he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1. And then what he does as he tells the story is that by the end of the story, he is going to evaluate what they have done with what he gave them. And what they have done is, we could say, their stewardship of the resources that were given to them. And the whole purpose of this illustration, this parable, is to say that, hey, you need to faithfully steward what I've given you. That's what it's all about. So we want to talk a little bit about that tonight. First of all, faithful stewardship starts with outward concern. If I'm going to faithfully steward resources, I've got to think about other people. It starts with me thinking about them first. And so he talks about the people in Macedonia and Achaia, how they're concerned about the poor saints in Jerusalem. He says that we are debtors to these people, okay, because they are Jews, and the gospel started with them first, okay? So all of that is something that he's considering. But what he's saying is, look, you need to follow their example by having this outward concern, looking out at what is going on. And he mentions a couple things. He says they gave from the heart. They had a very specific reason to give. They knew about the situation. And they felt this sense of duty. All of these things are motivators for people to get involved in being faithful stewards. And the gift was the fruit of this church being in a healthy place, not manipulation, coercion. I'm going to force you to do this. They were doing it because they were in a healthy place. It was from the heart. So the first fact is that stewardship starts with outward concern. The second fact is that it begins with a willing heart. Paul wanted the church to partner with him financially. Literally, he's saying, please send me to Spain. I will come by you into Spain. He wanted the church to meet his needs. And Paul was a person who, he got financial partnership a couple of different ways. He didn't do it just one way. He wasn't a lazy person. He was serious about what he was doing. So for instance, in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, we see an example of how Paul was taken care of. He says, I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. When I was present with you and wanted, I was chargeable to no man, for that which was lacking of me, the brethren which came from Macedonia supplied. In that particular scenario, what is he doing? He's getting support from other churches to take care of the work in Corinth. Okay? That's one of the ways that Paul was taken care of. Then we see another example. Sometimes he was supported like a pastor. So in 1 Corinthians 9:13 he says, do ye not know that they which minister about holy things live of the things of the temple? They which wait at the altar partake of the altar. Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. So in the first situation, he's talking about how this church is taking care of me while I minister in your church. In the second example, he's saying this church takes care of the one who is ministering to them. Then we see a third example, and that is what we would call bivocational. Paul is not being supported by anybody but himself. And so we see this in Acts chapter 18, verse 3. He goes to Corinth, and it says he's making tents. It's how he meets Aquila and Priscilla. They had the same occupation, the same work, and that's how he met them. In chapter 9, verse 16, he says, I've used none of these things, neither have I written these things down, that it should be done unto me, that any man should make my glorying void. In this situation, what Paul is doing is he's taking care of things himself. So what it's showing you is that sometimes a church partners with someone who's sent out. Sometimes the church is taking care of their own minister, you might say, or ministry team. And then sometimes a person is bivocational. But a steward with a willing heart wants to connect with someone who is ministering. That's the idea. So why would a church want to support missionaries? It allows a church planner to devote his energy exclusively to the work. So when Paul, in Acts chapter 18, was working bivocationally, he had to work, which took time away from him preaching the gospel. Okay? Think of the example of a church. Why do we have deacons? Well, deacons are in the church to help take the load, the physical burden load, off of those who are ministering the word so they can devote their energy to the preaching and teaching of God's word. If somebody is a bivocational minister, then guess what? They're working to feed themselves, and then they're doing the work of ministry. So there's a divide. And Paul was willing to do that in situations, but there are drawbacks, there are hindrances. If you're working with other people, you can kind of balance that load out on the ministry side. But if you are working by yourself, you're not able to get a lot done. Something as simple, like if I was going to work a full-time job where I was working 40 hours a week, I don't know when I would study to be able to preach. Every Saturday I'd be like putting all these things together, all right? And the truth is that just to handle the preaching load, you're talking about 3 or 4 days a week that you're almost entirely just studying. I mean, that's what you're doing to be able to preach 3 times, 4 times in a week. So you see the drawback. Well, if a church is financially partnered with a missionary or a church planter, it allows that individual to focus their energy on the work of ministry. And it allows that church to have an extended ministry in a culture where it can't physically go. And I guess to put it really simply, not everybody can learn a language, foreign language. Not everyone is going to have the skills that would make them effective in cross-cultural ministry. A lot of people wouldn't have the patience to be in that kind of a scenario. There are a lot of pressures that you face in a missions context. And so what it does is it allows a church to be a part of that through their giving. It's an extension of their ministry. And it also keeps the church focused on what really matters, the kingdom of God advancing. So this issue of stewardship with a willing heart is you want to find people you can partner with. The third fact, faithful stewarding involves bathing that investment in prayer. Now, if I want to make a good investment, I'm going to do some research, right? Yeah, hopefully. Well, when I'm investing in the kingdom of God, I want to pray for that individual or those individuals who are doing this work because they are engaged in a spiritual battle. And Paul, he talks about this in chapter 15, verses 30 and 31. He says, I beseech you, brethren, for the Lord Jesus Christ's sake, for the love of the Spirit, that you strive together with me in your prayers. So, they're working together in prayer, that I might be delivered from them that do not believe in Judea, that I might come unto you with joy by the will of God. He wanted them to not just financially partner, but he wanted them to be a prayer partner as well. So like we have missionaries come in October during our missions month. We want to encourage them. We want to consider potentially supporting them if we have the funds and it's a good person to partner with. And we want to pray for them. We want to know about their needs, and we want to shoulder that burden with them, read their prayer letters, know what's going on in their ministries that they're doing, and we uplift them in prayer. So he wanted the churches to partner with him in that way. And he understood that their investment of resources was vitally important, but God's blessing on the investment was even more important. It's not just sending the money to help the missionary. It's them doing the work well. If they're going to do the work well, we have to uphold them in prayer. And he talks about the cooperative nature of this work. He says they were laboring together, striving together. It was for their protection from enemies, that I might be delivered from those who do not believe. It was for an effective ministry, that the service would be accepted of the saints. And it was that they would be encouraged. They may come to you with joy and refreshment. All of those pieces are a part of that. All right, I want to pause and see if there's any questions on that. This should be pretty straightforward, I think. You know, a willingness, bathing that investment in prayer. The next fact that I want to mention, faithful stewardship enjoys the fruit of their investment. So, when we get behind a missionary or a church planter, and we see how God is working in their ministry, and we are upholding them in prayer, we're invested financially in what they're doing, we know about what's going on, when we hear of the joys, it's very encouraging. It's a great blessing. When a missionary comes and sits down and tells you about what's going on and the work that they're doing, even the hardships, you can rejoice with them, you can weep with them, you can learn from them. All of those things are there. And so in verse 32 he says, I want to be refreshed with you. That's the word he uses. He wanted their relationship to be mutually encouraging. And when we say mutually encouraging, he's saying, I want you to be encouraged and I want to be encouraged. I want us both to experience this. One of the reasons I enjoy having missionaries stay for more than just one service, maybe a week, something like that, is that it allows us to get to know them. Allows us to rub shoulders with them. And it makes the visit a lot more beneficial, that we can really feel like we have the potential for a partnership. But some of the things we can do, we have encouragement in the faith. You can learn from them as they teach. We can rejoice with them as God's blessed their labors. We can bear their burdens. You know, when people struggle and you've had a similar struggle, or they're struggling and you encourage them, that bonds people together. It really does. Our affections are stirred up of how the Lord is working, and we hear the stories. I think that when missionaries come to our church, and let's say they haven't been here in 5 years, and they come back, and they sit in a service, and they see how, you know, it's grown, and they hear stories of people who have gotten saved, and, you know, I'm amazed, like, our evangelist, the last evangelist we had here, we took him out to lunch, and he's like, half the people I talked to have gotten saved in the last 3 years. I mean, seriously, he really, like, he was just commenting, like, how many people, when he went and spoke with them, he asked them, you know, how long have you been at the church? They're like, well, I've been here a year. And he's like, well, how'd you find out about it? Well, I got saved, this and that. We got baptized this time. And he was just really, it was very encouraging to him to hear that. So, you know, a missionary can encourage us by what we hear is going on there, but they can be encouraged by seeing what is going on here. And if the church is healthy, that really encourages them a lot. And so we see the mutual encouragement. And we're expressing our love to a person when we give to them. We're giving of our own resources. I put a couple things in there just to think about for our own church. I'm not going to go through those here, but we should pray that God will bless our church, that we will have increased ability to partner, that He'll strengthen those who come into our church when they're visiting. But one of the things I really wanted to get into after this is I want to talk about how you flesh this out. We all know we're supposed to be involved in partnering with missionaries. We all know that we're supposed to be giving. We all know that it's a blessing to be able to partner with missionaries. It's an extension of our work. But what are some considerations, practical considerations that we need to think about? And these are some things that I wanted to discuss tonight. The first one is this: some cautions about vetting our potential ministry partners. Now, we get calls and emails from missionaries all the time at our church. We really do. A lot that want to use the Prophet's Chamber. that's one. Oh, here you go to a guest house, Prophet's Chamber. Is that true? Like, we do. So, are we on like a list or something? So we get a lot of those, but we get a lot of people that they're looking to get on the field. And every single one of those people, they want to serve the Lord. That's why they're doing that. Now, they're not all equally mature and wise and all those things, but there's a motivation that's getting them to the point where they're going to reach out to a church and say, we want to present our work, and here's what we're doing, and put together the presentation and the video and all those kinds of things. But we cannot partner with every single one of them. And we have to be selective. We have to consider this as a wisdom-oriented decision. And so some of the things that internally I discuss with people like Pastor Josh or the deacons, some of the things that we consider before we invite a missionary in are the things that we're going to talk about here. So first of all, there's a theological side to ministry partner. We're not going to partner with someone who is in disagreement with us theologically. In fact, one of the things we put together a missionary questionnaire, and one of the first questions is, could you, in good conscience, join our church? I mean, our faith, our doctrinal statement and practice, you know, could you really do that? Now, there are some people that they don't even read it, and they're like, of course I could. And there are others that might look and go, well, you know, I actually hold this belief system different than you do. And then, you know, we may have to talk about some of these things. There are certain doctrinal matters that are fundamentals, they're foundational, can't budge an inch on them. There are other doctrinal issues that are a little bit more secondary, and the truth is that they're more or less the kinds of things we discuss around the dinner table. We have ideas, but they're not gonna shape the church. They're not gonna divide the church. They're more secondary issues. But we're talking about the big picture. This is a Baptist church. We believe in eternal security. We believe in the substitutionary death of Christ, the deity of Christ, biblical authority. We could go through major doctrinal issues. We don't support people that we know are not aligned with us theologically. It's not that we're saying that they're bad people. They're people. I'm not a Presbyterian, all right? But there are Presbyterians who love Christ. They're doing great work as Presbyterians. I mean, I wish that they were not Presbyterian. They were Baptists. They had baptized babies, all right? Some other doctrinal issues. But the truth is that they love the Lord, and they're reaching people with the gospel. And some of the great missionary biographies we read are people that were a little bit different than us, and God used them. But our church is looking to partner with those who we are aligned with on this issue. But then there's a second level of this, and that would be philosophy of ministry. And what I mean by that is that we may be in doctrinal agreement with someone, but when it comes to how they actually practice in the church, we have differences, okay? And, even within, there are other independent Baptist churches in Anne Arundel County. I'm friends with the pastors, and we are theologically, I'd say, pretty much in agreement. But sometimes philosophically, there's some pretty significant differences. And it comes out in, how program-oriented the church is versus not. And there's a lot of different things. And the fact is that when we talk about philosophy of ministry, we're talking about the conscience side of ministry. And there are certain things about the way that we conduct our church services and the way that we handle business meetings, lots of different things. They really fall under this philosophical side. And so as much as possible, we want to get behind missionaries who are philosophically in agreement. So when I talk about missions, we talk about the self-supported, okay, an indigenous church, self-governing, self-propagating. We talk about those things. I want to partner with missionaries who are looking to establish an independent church, not a church that's going to be like pastored by them forever, and they have all these little satellite churches and they got like this kingdom there, I want them to actually train local pastors and then turn the work over to those pastors. And so that's the philosophical side of ministry. And that's one of the reasons I love having question and answer during our missions month. So the missionaries come in and we ask them questions. We get to hear what they have to say. I get into conversations with them. I'm not there to ask them gotcha questions. I'm not there to make their life miserable. But I'm making an assessment of how philosophically aligned are we? Is this someone that I can really in good conscience encourage the church? Let's get behind this individual. So there's that side. And then there's the character side. This one is actually, sadly, it's a little harder to judge when you just interact with somebody for one service or two. But you hope that their sending church is really vetting them properly. They're not sending someone out who has poor character. But there are times that somebody looks really good on a resume, but you sit down and you have a meeting with them and you go, I'm just getting some weird vibes here. Something doesn't seem right. So, I may watch how they're interacting with their kids. May notice how they're interacting with their spouse. And in the back of my mind, I go, there's some reasons for me to have question about whether or not this person is someone I want to partner with. Okay? So we want to make some assessments about that. We want to find out. One of the reasons that I like partnering with people that I've known for a while is I've known them for a while. And maybe I knew them in college, seminary, a pastor that I've known for a while, someone that's a missionary overseas, and I've worked with them, I've interacted with them, I know something about them. I do like those kinds of situations. because there's not just the theological and philosophical, but there's the character side. Here's another one. Might not think about it, but temperament. The truth is that there are some people, theologically we are agreed, philosophically we're in agreement, they have good character, but I'm not sure how they're going to do on a foreign field going into another culture because they're extremely inflexible. Everything is so black and white to them that things that they're going to encounter are just going to throw them for a loop. And maybe you can make an assessment that this is a character issue a little bit. But I remember I was doing an interview for, I do Marketplace Chaplain, and I was on an interview call with someone who was being looked at. And the guy was good on everything but the temperament one. When I talked to the guy that was doing the interview with me afterwards, I said, I'm concerned about that one. And I gave him some reasons. And he said, good point. I kind of saw that too. And so the fact is we want to partner with someone who's going to be on the field for a long time. They're going to finish their course, whatever that is. Maybe they're there 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but they're going to be faithful till the fulfillment of whatever that ministry season is that God gave them. And going into another culture, you've got to have a temperament that can handle that. And then there's a relational side. It's nice to partner with people that you really connect with. And I often watch this. If we have somebody come in and I can see that they have a heart for people and people have a heart for them and they connect well with people, I'm not going to bend on the theology side. I'm not going to bend on the character side. But I will tell you this. On the philosophy side, I am a little more flexible with certain things. I really am. Because there's a relational side. There's even a side where sometimes I'll look at someone who's younger, I'll say they've never been exposed to certain aspects of missions philosophy. And I want to give them a little bit of room to grow, give them an opportunity. So these are some of the things that we consider. Cautions about vetting potential partnerships. Theology, philosophy, character, temperament, relationship. All right, any questions there before we move to the next one? All right, next. Some cautions about investing in a way that does not cripple. Now, the reason that I bring it up this way is because I've lived in a foreign context and I've seen what can happen when people go about this in an unwise way. Okay? It's sort of like this. When we're raising our children, we are raising them to become independent, right? We hope. We're not raising them to be a 20-year-old little child who, we make all their decisions, we make their bed for them, we do everything for them. We are trying to prepare them so that they can be independent, they can function independently and thrive. The fact is that our children have gifts, they have strengths, they have a lot of things that they're able to do if we don't crush those things. Okay? So the way that we raise them, the way that we train them, has to be with some foresight about the future. And the fact is, when it comes to working with people in a foreign context, we have to think about how the way we go about something today is going to affect it down the road. Now, that doesn't mean that we can 100% predict what's going to happen, but there are some things that are very likely to happen if we don't go about it the right way. And so, our ministry expectations need to be wise. When we have someone who's going to a foreign field, and I felt this personally because, I remember when we first went to Ghana, I was like, people are supporting us, we're going to be writing prayer letters, and I want to be out there and giving the gospel to people every single day, and I had this list of people that I was making contacts with, and I was setting up meetings, And it's great that I was doing that, don't get me wrong, but there are certain things that I was not learning on the early stage that I needed to before I got too involved in those things. Trying to work on language studies. Now, it was an English-speaking context, but the truth is learning the local language was still important. And what will happen is when somebody goes to a foreign field, if our expectations of them are not reasonable and wise, then they're going to feel that pressure and it's going to hurt them as they start the ministry work. Someone might say, well, I'm going to go in the first 2 years, I'm just going to be learning the language. And somebody says, well, I didn't send you there to learn a language. I sent you there to tell people about Jesus. Okay, both are true. If you want to reach people in their own language, you've got to learn the language, okay? You've got to learn the culture. And so we've got to think about our expectations. And I would say that by having a lot of missionaries in and learning about the burdens that they deal with and the struggles, it helps us to be more reasonable in this. I feel like our church is far better than most in this area, okay? But there's some out there that they got some really crazy expectations. I remember this one church that supported us, they said, we want to know how many tracts you distributed this year and how many people got saved and how many people got baptized and how many people you personally discipled. And I remember going, well, I don't know if discipleship is like a done thing after 3 weeks. Like, this is kind of like a lifelong process, is it not? You know, growing into Christ's likeness. And I just remember thinking like, man, I have no idea how many tracts I passed out. I didn't like keep a tabulation of all this stuff. And they wanted to know because they wanted to say, well, why are missionaries led this many people to Christ this year? And they passed out this many tracts this year. And they discipled this many people. And they baptized this many people. Expectations. Got to be reasonable with this stuff. Secondly, our financial expectations need to be wise. Sometimes a missionary goes to the field and quite frankly, they are not properly supported. And the reason they're not properly supported is because there was pressure from their sending church or a couple of churches to get to the field more quickly than they should have. I'll give you a personal example that's not too personal, but it is a little bit. So we raised our support very quickly when we went to the field. We started in September. Joel was born in August. We went to our first missions. Our first missions visit was in Texas. It was in September, so he was a month old. He was a little guy, and our support started coming in pretty quickly. And going into the summer, we were at 50%, and it was moving right along. And I remember, come about November, we were at 100%. And I remember having a conversation with one of the pastors. They said, well, you need to get on the field. And I said, well, we don't have enough money to pay for our shipping. You get on the field. And I remember feeling this pressure, this tension. I had to look at my finances and go, okay, how much do I have in the bank? How much does it cost to buy these tickets? How much does it cost to get my vehicle, import, all the stuff that needs to go on? And what I realized is, at my missions support level, I cannot go until this date because I will not have enough money to do it. And we were at zero when we went to the field. Now, the reason that we did it that way is because of pressure. It was that expectation. And so churches and pastors have to be cautious that their expectations are wise, that they're really considering the whole picture on this issue. Our personal involvement. Here's another one. I can use personal example as well. I love the concept of a missions trip. But sometimes missions trips are not a help to the missionary. Okay? When somebody comes, I had a conversation with a guy just the other day, and he's telling me about how he went to an Eastern European country, and he got arrested because he took a picture. And he was telling me it was horrible. He's telling me the whole story, how he and his friend, they got arrested, and they were treated pretty badly. And it's because he took a picture of a government building. They said, you're a spy, and it was a mess. Well, I didn't say much about it. I just listened to his story. But here's the truth. If you go on a missions trip and you go down to the market and you see a poor child sitting on the side and you take a picture of that child, his mother might be sitting right next to him. And she says, why are you taking a picture of my son? Do you think that I'm a poor and ignorant person and my child's playing in the dirt? I mean, actually, the child is playing in the dirt. And the question in their mind is, why are you doing that? You know, you put out your missions presentation and it presents the poverty and the suffering of a society. And someone says, well, is that, do you think we're really backward and we don't have all these amenities and things like that? And the point is this. When we go on a missions trip, when we get personally involved, there's a lot that we don't know about that culture. And if we're not careful, we could go into that city and we could make the next 6 months or a year very hard on that missionary because of the pictures that we took and the presentations that we did and some of the conversations that we had with people that have given them a perception that, wow, Americans are very proud and they're very racist and they don't respect our culture at all and they think that we are poor and backward. And all of a sudden, this missionary who really loves the people he's working with is going to have people, the back of their mind saying, is this how my pastor is toward me? So we have to really be cautious about this. It is true that going to another country can really open up a person's perspective. But what's also true is it has the potential to really harm the missionary if it's not done in a very careful manner. And so we have to be reasonable about this. And I remember one time we were going to have, I think it was our 5th year anniversary at the church in Ghana, and I thought this would be so neat. I'll contact all these supporting pastors and I'll have them teach. We'll do like a special week of meetings, and I'll have some of my favorite supporting pastors. They'll get on there and they'll preach and teach, and it'll just be really neat. And it was neat for a couple of them. But we had this one pastor who he sat in a McDonald's and he had his phone and he was just looking up his nose the whole time. And I just remember all these people going, what is wrong with that man? And I just remember thinking like, oh, this is not what I was hoping this would be. So, person involvement. You got to think about what you're doing. I'm laughing now. It wasn't funny then. And then our financial methods need to be wise. When we are supporting someone in a foreign context, there's a lot of stuff that we don't think about here. For instance, the house that we lived in, we had bars on all the windows. We didn't have bars on all the windows when we first lived in the house. We put them on after we got robbed. Okay. We were on a second floor. We had to have a walled community, a walled house that we had. We had a big guard dog. He was a mastiff. He was a mastiff German Shepherd mix. Dog's head was like this, big old massive dog. And you go, well, why do you need a thing like that? Well, because you get robbed all the time. If you didn't have a dog and a fence and somebody would watch your house at night and when you're traveling and things like that. And what ends up happening is we don't consider some of the costs that are there. But then when we think about somebody that we want to support that's on the field, we may bring in some entanglements we're not aware of as well for that individual. And I want to get into that in this next little section. Some cautions about investing in a way that does not entangle people. There's a couple of books that I've read when we were missionaries. One was about money and African culture. It was African Friends and Money Matters is what it was called. And it just talked about the difference between the way that Westerners view resources and the way that African cultures view resources. And I mean, you could probably have one for Latin American, Asian, just different parts of the world, Eastern European probably as well. And what it did is it gave you insight into when you make this decision, here is how this is being interpreted. And here's what's going to happen here. There's another book that I read called When Helping Hurts. And the idea is that by just throwing money at a problem or throwing money at an opportunity, you might actually create greater problems than you realize. There's a road that we used to drive in Ghana between Cape Coast and Accra. And I just remember this because we drove it a lot. Driving down the road, and there are all these little trees. And there's a big sign that said, "These trees have been funded by U.S. aid." And I just remember asking myself, why are American tax dollars buying trees in Ghana? I never could figure this out. The idea is that the United States, there's a lot of foreign aid into countries, and a lot of it is wasted. A lot of it is abused and misused. And when it comes to missions, we have to be careful that we don't provide entanglements or we don't abuse or misuse that money. So a couple thoughts. One, we need to understand the cultural context. If an American goes and lives in a country like a Latin American country or an African country, they are going to have to live in certain areas for their safety's sake. Okay? They're going to have to. If they don't live in an area that is safe, they're going to get robbed a lot. Their family could be in danger. They are going to be a target. Now, what that means is it's going to be more expensive for them to live in those areas than someone who is a national pastor who this is his home, this is his culture. He's not going to stand out in a certain community. He can live in whatever financially he can handle. So you need to understand that particular issue. Or if someone starts financially supporting someone, are there certain additional expectations that come on the other side? How do the other people in that church or in that community view that relationship? Foreign aid can incentivize unnecessary scrutiny. I remember there was a pastor that I knew, a local pastor, and one time he went to a meeting with some men from the United States, and with those men was a man that they were financially underwriting. Now, I didn't speak fluently the language where we were, but I knew what was being said in a lot of settings. And so we were sitting there, and here are these American pastors. Here is my friend, and here is this other man. And these two guys were talking in the local language. My friend looked a little uncomfortable, and the other guy was very animated, and I was picking up the conversation. So after we left that meal, I sat down, we're driving, and I asked my friend, I said, "So what were you guys talking about?" And he says, "Well, you'd never believe this." I said, "Okay, what was it?" I kind of knew where it was going. He said, "Well, we were talking about money and support." I said, "Okay, what did he tell you?" He said, "You missed out on a really good deal." He said, "I'm living large because these guys are giving me money." And he was saying this right in front of these guys, but they had no idea what he was saying. And the reason I bring this up is to say there are some people that are incentivized into these situations, and it's not good. There are guys that assume that when a person has this financial partnership, that they are in it for the wrong reason. And so it can actually create a little bit of an entanglement for a local pastor who is receiving outside funds. What that means is you have to be cautious. You have to know the dynamics before you enter into one of those situations. It can attract opportunists. If you were going to start a school, or you were going to start a church and you were looking to get Bible Institute students, or you're looking to get teachers, if you're paying a good wage, you will have no problem finding people that want to go into ministry and people that want to teach in a school. They're opportunistic. And so you have to be so cautious in those situations that you are not getting entangled with people that are doing this for dubious reasons. Foreign aid can create unhealthy relationships. And this is something that I definitely saw. If someone is financially supporting you and they want you to do something that you are struggling internally in your conscience with, guess what? You're going to have a very hard time telling them no. And the reason is because you know that your support is connected to whether or not you follow through with certain things that they want. And so as long as a local pastor is financially supported from outside his country, then that pastor really is not independent, because he's not going to be able to make decisions based on his own conscience when he has this other side out there. And a lot of American pastors, they don't understand the cultural dynamics that they're dealing with. A great example would be when we lived in Ghana, how they handled weddings. So they had something called a local wedding. They called it an engagement. An engagement was a wedding in African culture, a local wedding. Okay, so the bride's family and the groom's family, they'd come together. There was a bride price that was agreed upon by the girl's family, mostly her uncles. And when the young man brought the bride's price and all of the things that were requested through his uncles, brothers, whoever, once there was that exchange, there was a formal ceremony, and in the eyes of the community, they were married. Okay? They called it an engagement. Now, when we think of engagement, we think of someone who has given a wedding, an engagement ring. We're going to set a date to get married, but we would not say that that couple is married. Okay? They're not legally married. They've not had a formal church ceremony or secular ceremony, nothing like that. But in African culture, a traditional wedding is considered a wedding, and a couple would be considered married. And so there are certain laws that are a part of the marriage custom in a foreign context that sometimes American missionaries don't understand. For instance, if a couple wanted to get married in the United States, they go to the Justice of the Peace. They get married tomorrow if they wanted to, all right, as long as they're above a certain age. In Ghana, it wasn't like that. You applied for a marriage license, and when you applied for your marriage license, where you were going to get married had to post a ban that basically said, this is the wedding that's going to be taking place on this day. If anybody knows of a reason these two people should not get married, you need to tell the minister, you need to tell the local authorities, because the wedding is going to take place at this time, and it's going to be official. Now, we don't do that in our society. We might have used to done that, I don't know. But these would be some of the practices. Well, sometimes foreigners don't understand those things. Sometimes they think that those things are weird or different, or they think it should be done a different way than the way that it is locally done as a custom. And a conflict can arise between people in America that don't understand the culture and a pastor in a foreign country who does, and they're bound because of that financial relationship. So there has to be some caution and wisdom exercised in that situation. Foreign aid can also create an attitude of entitlement. What I mean by that is someone who actually was not thinking this way because of the access they have to getting a car or a much larger salary than they used to have, or now they can live in a house that they wouldn't have had before. All of a sudden, it can begin to breed a bit of pride and entitlement. And we have to be cautious whenever we're in these scenarios that we don't contribute to that. It can also create an unhealthy dependence and stunt people's growth. If a church is told, you cannot support your pastor, you need us to do it, that's what they're going to do. That's what they're going to do. But if they're told, you know what, you can, let's talk about what the Bible teaches, and you teach them what the Bible has to say about these issues, it's amazing what someone is capable of if they're encouraged to do it. An unwillingness to partner financially in any way can also be viewed as cold and stingy. Some missionaries will go to the extreme and they'll say, I would never, I don't want to entangle someone. I don't want there to be an unhealthy relationship, so I'm not giving anybody anything. Somebody will take that attitude as well. And I interacted with missionaries that fell on this side too far and some on the other side too far. And I find myself caught in between at times as well. But the idea is that you need to be thinking about how those things would be perceived. So, for instance, while we may not buy a piece of property outright or build a church building from the ground up 100%, we may contribute to a portion of that, encouraging people to give, and then helping them with a one-time gift. In the same way that when your kids grow up, you might help them with a down payment on a house, but you're not going to pay their house off for them. Or you may have helped them with part of their college, but maybe you didn't pay for all of their college. There's different things that sometimes we do that are going to show that we love and that we're invested in this individual, but we're not creating this dependency that's unhealthy and continues. So, what do we take away from this? Well, a couple of thoughts. God wants our church to be a faithful steward of the resources he's given us for his glory. And so that means we need to be giving. That means we need to be outwardly focused. It means that we need to be careful to vet those who we partner with. And it also means that we need to carefully think about the best way to minister to people when it comes to financial partnership. Secondly, we need to consider what God has given us as to steward. I mean, as Americans, we've been given a lot. We're very prosperous people. We can do a lot as a people because of the country we live in and the opportunities that we have available to us. There's a reason that people from all over the world want to move to America and live here. It's because it's a very prosperous country. There's incredible opportunities. When I compare the opportunities that are available to an American versus when I lived overseas, the opportunities for a young man or young woman that was trying to get a job, it was night and day different. So we need to consider that. We need to invest these resources faithfully and wisely for God's glory. So, may God enlarge our hearts to be missions-minded and to have a culture of that in our church. That's the burden. Any questions or comments? I know we kind of rattled through a lot of stuff there, but any questions or comments?